You know, I used to think worship was about singing songs, and that's important. And I spent my whole life, just about, I don't know what percentage, but a huge percentage in the context of being with God's people and singing and lifting praise to Him, and I love that. But what formed me in my life and taught me the most about worship was the side of the road in the rain on 3 in the morning on a night that I'll never forget in my life. Where a young boy in our church had died. I didn't know that, but they called me to come, and I got to their house, and the mother in her grief was holding her 4-year-old son and threw him into my arms and said, "Jamie, raise him from the dead." It's at that time that you realize so many things in life, that all your theology and all your belief and all your excitement about God's power. You know, I prayed over the boy, and I cried out to God to heal him, and I rebuked death, and I prayed every faith formula, but he still didn't respond. You know, the paramedics had already tried to resuscitate him, and they couldn't. And it's in that moment of helplessness that you realize is how fragile we are, and how faith doesn't have answers, and faith is not about life going the way that we always want it to go. And they mercifully took that boy out of my arms, and I left the house after saying whatever I said, trying to comfort them. And on the way home in the rain, I started pounding my dashboard, and I had to pull the car over, and I'm crying, and God spoke to me as clearly as I've ever heard Him, and He said, "I want you to worship me right now, son." And I'm like, "No, I'm not going to worship right now. I can't worship. How can I worship? My faith has collapsed. You let me down, God. You let this family down. This boy died." And it was in that moment that God spoke to me, "If you don't worship now, don't worship me again." And it was that stern of a warning. And He was forming a pastor. I didn't know that in the years to come I would have hundreds and hundreds of death experiences with people, and tragedies and car wrecks and cancers and suicides and hundreds of memorials to do. And I didn't realize that God was sent me to school in that moment to learn that answers are not going to comfort anybody. It's not by us demanding God to give us an answer. It's by allowing God to come into the pain, allowing God to step into our tears, allowing God without the answers to be trusted in our lives. And I began to worship, not because I felt like it, but because He was worthy. It seemed kind of harsh, but the reality was God was healing me, because He drew me out of my self-pity, my anger, my theological bondage, and He drew me into His arms. And I worshiped Him, and I've been worshiping Him ever since, not because I always feel like it, but because He's worthy. And when I worship Him, it heals me. It gives me a fresh perspective, a life perspective from His throne, because He's in charge, and we have to trust Him even when we don't understand. Learn to be that kind of worshiper that doesn't just worship when life is good, but it worships when you weep, and you worship when you have no answers, and you worship when you're alone. You worship when you feel like it, and you worship when you don't feel like it. He's worthy. He loves you. Worship Him today.